Welcome to Ignite Intimacy, a podcast exploring intimacy, romantic relationships, sexuality, and everything that relates to these hot topics. We're going in. Are you ready? This is your host, Laura Aisha. Let's do this. Hello, Ignite Intimacy community. This is your host, Miss Laura Aisha, and I am super energized to have another powerful woman on the podcast today. I would like to welcome you, Rachael Maddox, to Ignite Intimacy. What's going on, lady?
Thanks for having me here. Ignite Intimacy is such a great podcast name.
Thank you. Yeah, when I named the podcast, that Ignite word was really in my space. And I was thinking about, what am I craving more of in my life? And it was intimacy. And, it's like, oh, ignite intimacy. What if we're igniting intimacy in the lives of people all over the world?
Yum. Love that mission.
Yes. So it's great to connect with you. I always love to connect and parlay with other powerful women doing their thing in the world. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So you really focus on a very powerful topic that many, many people in the world can relate to, and that is healing sexual trauma. So we're going to do a deep dive into something that you call consensuality, which I can't wait to talk more about that and just learn more about what that actually means. We're going to talk about role play to deal with sexual trauma, cultivating healthy boundaries and making it more sexy to say no, among other things. So what I'd like to just learn a little bit more of is your origin story. Like, what were the times in your life, or the sort of the powerful experiences that you had that led you into doing the work that you do today, supporting others to heal from sexual trauma?
Totally. Yeah. And I'll just preface by saying I'll move slowly as I share this. And if you have a history of sexual trauma, just know you can fast forward. I'm not going to reveal anything that's super duper triggering, but full permission to pause or exit if it just doesn't feel safe or easeful to listen. To fast forward a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, because we love and care for our community here. So certainly if you're sensitive, if you've experienced trauma, feel free to fast forward through this part here. And I appreciate you presencing that, Rachael.
Yeah, totally. And I'll be vague. So basically, like so many people who have sexual trauma histories of difficulty happening in their sex lives at some point, I had that trauma on the back shelf of my psyche, in a box, growing cobwebs. And I really didn't want to look at it or face it. And I've been in the personal development industry for about 10 years. Bright person, lots of, capacities and skills. And yet I was still finding myself chronically stuck in a few places. One, my sex and my love life. So I experienced earlier childhood sexual trauma, and then I was married for about 8 years, and I had a pretty sexless, cuddly marriage that was very safe, but also not super sexy. And when we broke up, when we decided it was time to go our separate ways, I ended up being date raped twice when I was 25.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a big wake-up call. But even with that wake-up call, I still didn't have the capacity, the know-how, the skills, or the resources to directly deal with my sexual trauma. And then I ended up developing vulvodynia, which was chronic pain in my vulva. I was going to community acupuncture a few times a week. I was doing all kinds of stuff, ecstatic dance in Portland, Oregon. I was doing all these things that were more DIY, or also circuitous routes to healing my trauma. But I was still really afraid to look directly at it. And then basically, I ended up having what was moving toward vaginal melanoma. So I had a fairly large spot on my vulva that was one little iota away from melanoma, and I had to have surgery, basically right next to my clit.
Wow.
Quite intense. And at this point, because neurologically, my pleasure center was sending, pain signals to the pleasure parts of my brain, I spiraled pretty hard and went through a pretty intense depressive period. And at this point, like, God was knocking on my door like, sister, it's time. You got to look at this, and you got to look at it thoroughly, scientifically, holistically, and directly. So
Wow.
from that experience, I was led to a wonderful woman named Bridget Vixens, who has a trauma resolution teacher training called Alchemical Alignment. But I first just started working with Bridget. She's in Silver Spring, Maryland. I started working with her, and I had 3 sessions with her in her modality, which is similar to somatic experiencing. So it was in person, included touch, but was fully clothed. Lots of slow motion completion of incomplete emergency responses in my body, in my nervous system. Emergency responses that are healthy, like hypersocialization, fight or flight, freeze. These are like healthy, intelligent emergency responses. But when we don't complete them, when they aren't successful in keeping us out of danger, or when they maybe were successful but are still kind of lodged in our bodies, that's when we develop trauma. And my definition of trauma is an embodied violation hangover, or really an embodied violation response hangover. It's the response is stuck in your system. So we did a lot of work to complete some incomplete emergency responses. And then I ended up doing her training program. And through this whole process, I was like, holy crap, there are so many people who are trying to approach their trauma resolution through their minds or even through their emotions, but totally leaving out the root of why and how trauma gets stuck, which is a body-based issue. Of course, we have identities that form around trauma. So there is personality stuff, there is mind stuff, and of course our spirits are affected. But if we don't deal with the nervous system, the sustainability and the efficiency of our healing is much less. So I saw this awakening for myself, and I realized, like, holy crap, one, I know so many people have sexual trauma and also developmental trauma, interpersonal difficulties from childhood that maybe weren't sexual, but were still violating. So first of all, so many people have trauma. Second of all, so few people know what trauma is, how it works, and how it resolves. So it was like this huge gap from my perspective in the industry and in the people. And I was like, all right, I got to work to fill this gap. So I sat down and I wrote my first book called Secret Bad Girl, which is a sexual trauma memoir and resolution guide. And it tells a story of how I discovered, oh, I actually have trauma. I'm not just secretly fucked up. I'm not just secretly bad, but there's this secret spell that I've been stuck under that I didn't even know. And here's how I came to know that. And here is the long, circuitous, spiraling journey that I've gone on to experience trauma resolution. And from there, I started working with women and men who had sexual trauma. And I've worked with hundreds of people, one-on-one in groups and retreats and workshops. And I'm working on my second book now called Rebloom, which is the path to healthy sex, love, and intimacy after trauma.
That is amazing. It's like in life, we can experience so much adversity, and the adversity can take you down, and that's natural, right? It's like, okay, so it takes you down. And then the key is to not let it keep you down and to actually allow it to propel you forward. And that sounds like exactly what happened in your experience.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Whereas like it was fuel for you to really step into larger expression of your, or more, maybe more even powerful expression of your contribution in the world.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I'll speak to that, which is part of the reason why I got so devoted is I was over here, this like essentially highly achieving person, and yet finding myself in chronic loops around money, around sex and sexuality, and around self-confidence, even though like my soul was designed to be powerful. And even though I'd been trying from so many angles, from mindset repatterning, from regular therapy, from, identity work, to shift into a new way of being, and nothing was really working until I dealt with this innermost layer, which was my nervous system and these incomplete emergency responses and this unresolved trauma. So it got me really fired up because I thought, well, how many talented, brilliant people are stuck looping in some secret trauma spell and they don't even know it. And they're trying really hard, but in the wrong ways. And that was the thing that really got me ignited, was this sense of, okay, there's a lot of people who have great intentions, who are trying to make the most out of their story, right? Rise from the ashes, but who actually don't have the right information or resources.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, I'm working so hard. And, this sort of story loop, I'm hearing something for myself in that as well. And it's like, as a human being, when I feel like I'm hitting my head against the wall, I have to take a step back and look at that and say, like, okay, what is there that when I see it, I'll be free from this pattern?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
So talk with us about the role that role play can have in dealing with sexual trauma.
Sure. So here's the thing with role play. It's kind of an advanced trauma resolution move. It's like once you've done this work around core nervous system recalibration and core boundary repairs, meaning you now know how to say no to what is a no in your system and how to invite in what is a yes, how to slow things if they're moving too quickly. And it's not, that no and that slowing and that yes doesn't come with a lot of charge, but it's just simple, which doesn't mean it's always easy, but there's a sense of confidence and trust in yourself that you can communicate your needs appropriately and those needs will be respected and honored, right? That's like the foundational piece, which is also not a small deal, like a huge deal to get to that place. But once you have more of that foundational skill in place, then you can start to play with identity. So I always like to start in the center with the nervous system and then move out toward emotions and then move out toward identity. And I think of spirit and soul as like the scent of the onion that travels throughout the whole system. But once you've dealt with some of those inner pieces, then you can move out to the identity piece. And I think it's a really fun place to get. And the question you might want to ask yourself, if you're like feeling like, yeah, okay, I know how to say yes, I know how to say no, I know how to like slow things or know things, is what's the identity that I'm stuck inside in my sex life? Or if I were to look at myself from an outside perspective and kind of name the character I play in sex most of the time, what would the character be? And a lot of times when we have trauma, the character can include could be on one of these two sides. And obviously there's so much diversity to what roles we can play. But oftentimes the role will either be, I need you to be really safe and careful with me because I have sexual trauma. So I need you to always check in. I need you to go at my pace. I need you to like honor and respect me. Another common role for people who have experienced trauma is I'm in charge. And I'm going to like run this show so that I'm safe. And then a third role is a little bit in between, or well, actually a third role might be a little different, which is I don't actually know what I want or what I need. And so they're going to just run the show and I'm going to just like hang in there and try to do what's asked of me.
Mm-hmm.
So those are three of the common ways common identities or archetypes that I'll see from people who experience trauma. And actually the third one is the most common. I don't really know what I want or what I need. So I'm either buffering requests or following someone else's lead. I'm just kind of like keeping up with this momentum of someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's no ability to say no. There's no ability to express your needs. And that specific situation. You're just sort of like going along for the ride and hoping for the best.
Right. Exactly. You're a passenger. So the role might be one of a passenger on a safari ride with roads that are unpaved, and you're just holding on and praying that this all goes well.
Oh gosh, which is not a very empowered place to be many times.
Yeah. And it's totally the reality of a lot of people, trauma or not. So
Absolutely. Yep.
the question, like a primer question I like to ask is, what's a role that might make you feel both safer and sexier? So when we think of role play, oftentimes we're thinking, I'm going to have to perform something or pretend I'm a certain character. But role play for trauma transformation is different. It's about, who can I embody? Who can I call in? Who can I invoke that would make me feel both safer and sexier? Maybe being the principal who gets to say if you've been good or bad, and who gets to tell you what the rules are, and who gets to be in a place of authority might feel safer and sexier. Maybe being some younger self who gets to be taken care of, who gets to whine and ask for what she wants, and who gets to like throw a tantrum if it's not how she likes it. That might feel safer and sexier for you. And the cool thing about identity is it's mutable. Identities are meant to change as we change. So this is a question you can take with you on your sexual journey.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, I can see how the role playing can just put you into the energy of something that is possibly just so different than what you're normally used to or what you think you're capable of, and really give you the access to the power that comes along with that particular role.
Totally. So, for example, I was stuck in a role for a while in the last few years of Rachael Maddox trauma resolution educator, coach, and guide, which means, like, what are all the things that come along with that role? You have to be the safest fucking person on earth. You can't really initiate that much because in my job, it's really about following the lead of someone else because that's how you know that they feel safe. There's like so many things that were getting boxed in, so many ways I was getting boxed in. And so to break out of that, I was like, what does it look like to be Rachael Maddox, the boss of the bedroom? What does it look like to be Rachael Maddox, like hedonistic queen? And letting myself break the box of who I've been so that I could experience new joy and new eroticism and new pleasure.
I love that. Yeah. I'm like, who do I want to be?
Exactly. It's a fun question for anyone.
It really is. So, okay. So that's really cool. And is this something that you work with your clients within this technique?
Totally. 100%. And it works great for moms too, right? Like sometimes moms will get to this place where they're just like, gosh, all the women in me are fainting and exhausted with having to take care of everything and everyone. Cool. So if name all of the parts of you that just want to faint or that just want to run away, and who's left standing? What parts of you are still here? Once you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. 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 Great. Now what? What's left? And what's the identity you could really hone and harness from what's left?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That's so interesting. It's all about liberation, and so many humans are walking around within the being suffocated by their own ways of being. And, I say this to myself as well. It's like, how am I showing up in the world that's getting me what I don't want and not what I want? And why do I keep showing up that way?
Totally.
So, okay. So that's really cool. And so talk with us about cultivating healthy boundaries and like being able to say no, or to say like, oh, you know what? Don't like that, or not right now, in a more sexy and inviting, magnetic way.
Yeah. Totally. So the way I like to approach this is just keeping an eye on what is your wholehearted, pleasureful, embodied yes. So we'll back up and we'll just talk about consensuality first. And the reason why I like that word is consensual has sensual inside of it. So for me, this word consensuality is to do things in consent with what's pleasureful, wholehearted, and embodied, an embodied yes for you.
Mm.
So when we can attune to and start to learn what creates pleasureful, embodied, wholehearted yeses in my system, we can be saying no to the things that aren't that by inviting the things that are. So for example, like a lot of times when we have histories of trauma or when we have female anatomy, we enjoy a longer arousal period, a longer period of moving into eroticism and sensuality. And let's say you're with somebody who's constantly trying to go quickly, like can't wait to get your pants off and just put it in. You might be able to express like, hey, I love when we do XYZ and then this and that and da, 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 and it's such a turn on and it's so hot to me. So first of all, being able to express what you love and being able to celebrate what someone else is doing that you love that you might want more of as opposed to the thing that you don't want. So that's the first piece. The second piece is you can practice. There's like different levels around practicing boundaries. One is if you're really new to saying no, I suggest starting in a very safe place, which would be with your best friend in a completely non-sexual kind of situation. So for people who are brand new to saying no, what I like to suggest is this game called Boundaries and Belonging, where you call up your best friend and you set this up. You say, like, let's do this 4 times, 15 minutes each time, like once a week for 4 weeks or something like that, just to get into the habit. And what you do is you ask each other questions that get incrementally harder to say no to. So for example, I might say, hey, Laura, would you have me on your podcast once a week for the next year? And then what would you say?
Rachel, that sounds like so much fun, but right now I have so many other guests I want to feature and I only come out with 1 episode a week. So maybe we could do another episode in like 3 or 4 months.
Awesome. Okay. That's reasonable. I hear you. And like, thanks for being honest and taking care of yourself. I totally respect that.
Awesome.
Right. So part of the game is 1, making a request that you would get a no to. 2, letting the person practice saying no. And 3, as the person receiving a no, honoring, respecting, and thanking the person for being honest. And what this does is it creates a positive feedback loop around saying no. Because we don't want to say no if we're afraid that we're going to get kicked out of the club of belonging.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
But if we have that experiential evidence that says, when I say no, people respect me, then when the stakes are higher, in situations that are more charged and less easy to say no in, like the bedroom with someone new perhaps, or someone old, we have a new expectation around reverence. And that couldn't be more important. Yeah. So then we might make it even harder. Like I might ask you an even harder question, like, Laura, well, could we please just at least, like, could you have me on 4 times in the next year? Like, that would really mean a lot to me.
Which is like almost like a fairly reasonable request, right? It's not like once a week for the next year. Rachel, I love that you love chatting and recording these podcasts so much that you would want to do 4 episodes in the next year. I actually have a guideline for my podcast that I don't feature any guests 4 times in a year. So definitely possible to do 1 more episode this year, but let's talk about that. I'll put a reminder in my calendar and follow up with you in a couple of months.
All right, cool. I respect that policy. I wish it was different, but I get that. And, I honor you. And thanks for for sharing your truth and the way you like to do things. So on purpose, here's like, I'm curious for you. I just want to model this because I think it's fun to demo and I think it's important for people to see. How did it feel to receive a little bit more of a challenging request, both emotionally and maybe in your body?
It felt like my system was on alert. And I also noticed, because I can certainly have this, I wouldn't consider myself a people pleaser. However, I can get into people pleasing in certain situations. So I think it's more like, I want people to like me, right? So there was more like, oh man, am I going to like mess up this relationship, or is she not going to like me anymore because I'm saying no?
Great. Thank you for bringing that up. That's so cool to hear, because the first emergency response that we have when we experience perceived danger, and that danger could be getting kicked out of the club of belonging, right? Not being liked, is to hyper socialize, which is to try to make everyone else around you feel safer or get their needs met so that we're safer. So if you say yes, it keeps you perceptibly safe. And that is the first line of defense in our physiological security system. It's most people's first response to perceived danger or threat.
Interesting.
Yeah. So what's cool about this is part of the practice too is noticing, how did it feel in your body and how did it feel emotionally? And getting used to identifying, oh, when I'm put on the spot, when I'm put under pressure, it feels more awkward to say no, which is why I want to actually practice saying no more under pressure. Similarly, another move that you can practice in the game is slowing. So instead of just saying no, you can also practice slowing. So an alternative to what you said could have been like, that's a request I'm not used to getting. I'd really love 24 hours to think about it and I'll get back to you. And having those slowing lines in your pocket.
Yep.
Then you get to go home or go out of the relational field where the danger feels present or the threat feels present, and your higher level brain functioning comes back online and you have more capacity to respond from that place of consensuality. What would be a pleasureful, wholehearted, embodied yes from me? So slowing is just as good of an option as saying no.
I love that. Yeah. So slowing is a buffer. It just creates a buffer. It's like, you know what? Let me get back to you on that. And it's important to say when. Let me get back to you tomorrow about that. Or, I'm going to get back to you by the end of the week about that.
Totally. And everyone, I want to just say this loud and clear. You have permission to slow things down. You have permission to say no. So if we want to apply this to the bedroom, which is level, probably advanced level, right? I think you can spend a lot of time just practicing these things outside of the bedroom, and it will make it so much easier inside the bedroom, but still you'll have challenges. So inside the bedroom, what I like to do is, again, set up an intentional game with someone you feel really safe with, where you say, let's do no play and slow play, which isn't the same as non-consent play, which some people might be familiar with, where you're on purpose breaking consent in a consensual container. But this is actually, we're going to practice making no feel sexy. And we're going to practice slowing down feel sexy. And so what you might like to do is consider how you would feel most sexy saying no, and how you would feel most sexy slowing things down. And then you set up the container. You say to your partner or whoever, group of people or whatever it is, let's play this game where I want to see how sexy we can make slowing things down be, or how sexy we can make saying no feel. And I want to get the chance to go, and then I want you to get the chance to go. And what I like to consider in this game is both what would you like to say, what would you like to do with your physical body, and how would you like the other person to respond in terms of what they say and what they do, both in the no and in the slow. So for example, I might, if I'm trying to slow things down with somebody, I might request, okay, I'd like for you to, the game we'll play is you're going to like try to take my top off. And what I'll do is I will I will hold your wrist and squeeze it tightly. So I will say like, stop with my hand on your wrist. But what I will say out loud verbally is not yet. And then I'd like for you to respond with, whatever you say, queen. What would you like now then? And you like back your hands up. So
yes.
Just to what would actually turn me on for me to like grab, like squeeze someone's wrist tightly and say, not yet. And for them to remove their hand and say, whatever you say, queen, what would you like me to do? Like, that's sexy. So can we make slowing and knowing, N-O-hyphen-I-N-G, sexy? Yes, we can.
Oh gosh, that's hot. That is sexy.
Hot.
Because, as I spend more time on planet Earth in this life, I just realize how much juiciness there is in slowing things down.
Mm-hmm.
And in savoring and building.
Right.
And there's it. Really, for me, there's not a lot of pleasure in the quick hit anymore at all. And I don't know if there ever really was, like truly. However, I'm just so grateful that I know that now, and I'm confident and clear enough to express that. However, this is a game that I will be playing. I will definitely be experimenting with this.
Totally. And I love that you said that about like, not into the quick hit or whatever. So many people have shame around their desire to slow things down or their need to slow things down or their desire or need to say no.
Yes. Yes. And like, I have had men in my world where it's like, first of all, people are not talking about STDs enough. Like, no one seems to have the conversation. Have you been tested? Okay, so the last time I got tested was blah, blah, blah. It's like, so first of all, there's not a lot of conversation about STDs when it comes to engaging sexually with someone. So that's like the first thing that I notice. And then there have been a couple of men in my realm over the last, let's say, 6 months who are like ready to jump into unprotected sex. And I'm like, these are grown ass men. These are grown men. And I'm like, no, like, no. First of all, that is a sacred thing that I save for only the top of top king man in my life. You know what I mean?
Right.
And you haven't even asked me if I've been tested or if I have anything.
Right.
And you want, like, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's like a huge gap in our society around sex and sexuality and STDs and it just having these conversations, like making disclosure sexy.
Right. Well, it's funny that you brought that up. We weren't planning on talking about this necessarily, but I actually teach a thing called the safer sex foreplay conversation.
Ooh.
And again, it's a conversation that you can have to make things sexy. And you can choose and like you can grab bag what you're going to have, what pieces of the conversation you're going to have with somebody and when. But the things that I like to cover in the safer sex foreplay conversation, I like to start with STDs. When was the last time you were tested and what were your results? So first of all, I like to bring it up like, hey, before I take my clothes off with someone, I like to have this safer sex foreplay conversation. I find that it's pretty sexy. That's my line. I find it to be pretty sexy. It's kind of in depth, but it's sexy. And the reason why I frame it that way is like, it's way sexier to know what's going to make both you and whoever you're going to sleep with or play with feel safe before you're in bed than after or during. It's sexy to have safe systems and containers set up. It's not that sexy to go in blind. It actually physiologically creates fear, nervousness, and apprehension in the body.
Yes,
so if you can cover the conversation first, we're going to have a much better time in bed.
Yes. Yes, I love that. Okay, so STDs, when was the last time you were tested and what were the results?
Yes. Another question is there anybody that would be upset about us doing this if they found out?
Yes. Yes.
Right? Is there anyone who would be upset? Another question is, let's see, I'm pulling this up. What kind of STD/I and what kind of pregnancy prevention do you use? And STD prevention do you use? Do you use condoms? Are you on the pill? Do you like to pull out? Like, what's your method of protection and contraception?
Mm-hmm.
So those are like the first line of questions I like to ask, which are really like the most tangible. Then also I might ask, what's your relationship style? Both in terms of monogamy or polyamory, and also in terms of like attachment. I know these are kind of advanced questions and people might not have all of the answers to them, but like, do you have an open relationship style? Are you super avoidant? Are you super anxious? I want to know that before I have sex with you.
Girl, a woman, you are speaking my language right now because I am finally getting this in my, as a grown ass woman now, finally
Right.
getting this. Like it took until 40, but I'm not shaming myself because I'm glad I'm here now.
Yeah.
And it's like, I want to know, because certain people want to just like jump into being intimate. And for me, it's like, I want to know, are you the kind of person who's going to disappear and never reach out again? Like, should I, because like, if you are, then that doesn't work for me,
Right.
And like, and do you just want a one-off and that's it? Because that may also not be what I'm looking for right now.
Right.
Like,
or with some people, you might be like, I really hope this person just wants a one time because I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so you want to know, like, what are we dealing with? And it's just better to know ahead of time. Now, I'll keep going through the questions, but one of the objections I hear all the time to this is like, really? No one wants to have this conversation. And this is another thing that I recommend practicing with a friend or many friends, just so you can get used to sharing your answers and practice bringing it up. Like, hey, things are feeling really sexy. I have like a few questions I like to go through with people before I ever take off my clothes because I find it makes things even sexier. Like, I'm into you, so I want to ask these questions instead of like, here, I need to interrogate you before we take our clothes off.
Totally.
So some of the other questions I like to ask are, what are some things you like and don't like in sex? Like, what are 3 things you like in sex and don't like? Again, this is a foreplay conversation. So it's hot to know, but now you're also finding out, oh, this person doesn't like if I leave hickeys, or this person doesn't like me to go near their butt, or this person doesn't like to be scratched. Good to know ahead of time, instead of like having those awkward moments in bed where someone's doing something you don't like. You're new to hooking up with them. You don't necessarily want to tell them. You don't want to make them feel bad, but you don't want to suffer, right? Like, you can avoid all of that by just saying ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
And then finding out what someone likes. Great. Now you know a little secret into their pleasure trove.
Well, and I would even say, what about like having this conversation without any intention of going there in the same space and time, right? So like having the conversation and not going there afterwards, like just really giving some space to it. I mean, of course, it could definitely create a very hot environment for some juicy goodness. And it may also be like, let's not have any expectation of like connecting on a physical level after this conversation. Like if we want space to just sort of like be with what came up in the conversation, great. Because ultimately it's like we want what works, right? So if someone's not a right fit, no matter how bad we want to fuck them or whatever, it's like, if it's not a right fit, then like save yourself the heartache and, frustration and pain of engaging with someone that you're going to feel possibly physically attached to and desire them, and they're not going to care or want you anymore.
Right. And yes, 100% to everything you said. And If you're like, I don't feel comfortable having this conversation, it's something to work toward, because these are emotional intimacy skills that are going to increase the joy and the satisfaction and the pleasure and the consent and the consensuality in your sexual relationships. And if the person that, like, the other reason why this is great to do before you get in bed with someone is you get a really clear litmus test on how emotionally secure, intelligent, and aware this person is. Some people are going to be like, I don't want to talk about these things. And then you have to consider, well, if they can't talk about these things, do I want them to do I want to mix my sexual parts with theirs?
Totally. Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's good to know who you're dealing with.
God, I'm so grateful for you, Goddess. This is amazing.
Totally.
So I want to just touch on the consensuality before we wrap up here. Is there anything else that you ask that within this safer sex foreplay conversation that you want to share?
Few other things real quick. What makes you feel physically and emotionally safe before, during, and after sex or intimacy? So maybe beforehand, you like lots of emotional connection and you like to have this kind of conversation, so you know, like, you're all on the same page. Maybe during, you like words of affirmation, or you like, reassurance that you're doing a good job, or you like to go slowly. And maybe after, you like to know, or maybe even before, you like to know, is this person going to sleep over? Are they not going to sleep over? Are they going to call me tomorrow? Are they not going to call me tomorrow? Maybe after, one of the things you like is to make a connection again within 24 hours. So what do you like? What makes you feel physically and emotionally safe before, during, and after sex or intimacy? What's your safe word? And how do you like me to be if you use your safe word? And then what's your wildest and mildest dream for the evening, for our experience? Mildest is it would be like this, we would have this kind of night, da da da. Wildest is it could be like this. If you have this whole conversation with somebody, you will know very much. It doesn't take the magic out. People also are afraid, is this going to take the magic out? No, it adds a sense of anticipatory magic.
Yes, totally. It adds the juice. It's like it can totally support a hotter, more connected, more juicy, intimate experience, because you're actually building intimacy and trust with this person before you take your clothes off.
Right. So great.
In my estimation and from my experience, how can you have true intimacy when you're not being open and vulnerable with each other?
Right. Right. Totally. And when you're not being open and vulnerable with yourself, we are dishonest with ourselves because we're afraid of losing. And that's all rooted in a paradigm of scarcity. But there are so many humans on planet Earth, and we get attached to people fulfilling our needs in certain ways. And while I'm a fan of secure attachment and long-lasting relationships, I'm also an advocate for honoring or celebrating your natural and easy overlaps with yourself and another person, and honoring the dissonance or the differences, and saying, you know what? I don't need to force myself or someone else to be what we're not so that we can achieve an arbitrary goal. Instead, I'm going to look at the way things are and honor the spread that's on the table here.
Yes. Yes, baby. Talk about it, sister. Rachael Maddox, you're just lighting me up over here. Awesome. Just share a little bit about consensuality, which is a term that you've coined, right?
Yeah. I've just created this word recently.
That's awesome. I love creating words.
Yeah, well, because I looked at the word consensual so many times, and I got off on the fact that sensual was inside of consensual. So, there's three pieces to consensuality. The first piece is in this root of sensuality. What sensations feel good in my body, but also what sensations feel good in my heart, right? So we all know that feeling of like having a twisted or turning heart. And I think in the world of sex, so often we're focusing on like, is my pussy opening, or is the dick hard, or like, and that is the only cue. But I really think we want to be lined up with our sexual centers and our emotional centers and our mental centers before we say, yes, I'm going in. So consensuality is about, first and foremost, being able to read what is a pleasureful, wholehearted, embodied yes for me? What does that feel like? What does it feel like to have a wholehearted, pleasureful, embodied yes in my system? And then how do I have integrity with myself and say, I'm going to honor my wholehearted, or I'm going to celebrate my wholehearted yeses and honor my no. To stay in consensuality with yourself is to only say yes when it's wholehearted. And to set limits and boundaries so that you stay within that feeling of wholehearted turn on.
Yes.
And when you can do that, when you can say no or set limits to your yeses. So like, yes, I would like to go down on you, but only for the next 10 minutes. And you don't have to say that out loud, but to be able to notice, oh, I'm leaving that zone of consensuality. I'm leaving that feeling of a wholehearted, embodied, mental, emotional, physical yes. And I'm moving into the arena of force, pretending, trying, striving, lying. I'm going to notice that. And I'm going to pause. And I'm going to ask myself, what can I say or do to get back into the sweet spot, the consensuality zone? Because that's where love is. That's where magic happens. That's where orgasm lives. That's where we change each other's lives.
Rachael, you are such a gift. Thank you so much for sharing yourself with us today and all of these powerful, powerful just practices. And even just the words to actually say this stuff and the energy, and for modeling that for us so beautifully. How can people find you online?
This was so much fun. I loved jamming with you. You can find me at RachelMaddox.com, and I'm Rachael. I'm at Instagram, same thing, Rachael Maddox. And yeah, I'm teaching a class on consensuality coming up soon here in May. I don't know when this podcast is coming out, but doing a 6-part course on consensuality. And I'll be putting my book out in the fall, my next book. You can find Secret Bad Girl on Amazon too, if you're curious.
Amazing. And we'll link to Secret Bad Girl in the show notes. And we'll also have Rachael's website in the show notes, RachelMaddox.com. It's RACHAEL, M as in mother, ADDOX. RachelMaddox.com. We'll have that in the show notes, as well as a link to her book, Secret Bad Girl. And you have an upcoming course on consensuality, consent.
Yeah.
And that's in May. And we'll get this out. We'll get this out so that it's out for that series. When does that launch, the group program?
It's like mid-May. Let me see. I forget the exact. I think May 15th. May 15th will be the first class. It'll be 6 classes. I'm going to teach Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent, then the barriers of consent, and then 4 different classes about the different quadrants or ways you can be in consent: by giving, by receiving, by taking, and by allowing. And each class is going to have its own ritual. So it's called Consensual Calling In. And it's really about how do we call in, activate, and awaken consensual relationships of our dreams.
Yes!
It's going to be so much fun.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Okay, cool. So people can find that on your website?
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Ignite Intimacy, you heard it here. Rachael Maddox and Laura Aisha jamming on some really juicy topics. So check out Rachael, RachelMaddox.com, Rachael Maddox on Instagram, and check her out on Facebook. All of these links will be in the show notes. And I'm just so grateful that you were here with us today, Rachael, that our community is here tuning in. Ignite Intimacy, if you have any questions or comments, you want to reach out directly about this episode, holler at us, hello@igniteintimacy.com, and hop over to iTunes, leave us a review and a rating, and share this with your friends. You know they want the goodness. So thank you so much for tuning in. Stay blessed, and ciao for now. Thanks for tuning in to another conversation on the Ignite Intimacy podcast hotline. We love that you choose to spend your time with us. Check us out at igniteintimacy.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes and leave us a review and a rating. It helps more people know about us. We love to hear from you. You can email us with questions, comments, or suggestions to hello@igniteintimacy.com. And tell your friends. Music was arranged by Jason Pfaff and Mike Corey, and this podcast is produced by yours truly, Laura Aisha. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next one. In the meantime, let your light shine bright and ignite your intimacy.